this Sikha is in connection to what's discussed in the Parsha, how the Yidden see the Shechina coming down into the Mishkan, they praise Hashem, etc., etc. The Rebbe is explaining a Rambam in Hilchas Bias HaMikdash, where the Rambam is discussing the Isser, the prohibition of a person that's Tameh to remain in the Beis HaMikdash. The Rambam is discussing a situation of someone that had become Tameh while being in the Beis HaMikdash, and he needs to rush out. So in one halacha, the Rambam says he's not allowed to delay, he's not allowed to linger, stay for a long time in the Beis HaMikdash, or to bow down as he's leaving the Beis HaMikdash, before he leaves the Beis HaMikdash, or to go out the longer way. In other words, he has to take the shortest way out. If he did one of these three things, he would be chayiv kares if it was b'mezid, or a carbon if it was b'shogeg. In a separate halacha, the Rambam says that if he did bow down as he was leaving, but bowing down towards the outside, not turning around towards the Beis HaMikdash, bowing down towards the outside, he would not be chayav unless he lingered during this bowing down a certain shiur. And how long is the shiur of this lingering? It's in order to read the pasuk, Vayichru apayim arza. It's the pasuk describing Divrei Hayomim. How the Yidden in the Beis HaMikdash, after the fire of Hashem came down into the Beis HaMikdash, they bowed down to the ground. Vayichru apayim arza al haritzpo, vayishtachvu, vahoides la Hashem ki tov ki lo chazeh. They thank Hashem for all of His kindness. And the Rambam concludes, V'zeu shiur ishtachavoya. This is the shiur of bowing down. So the Rebbe asks a number of questions. Number one, why is the Rambam dividing this into two details? He first speaks about the shiur of shehiyah, the shiur of lingering, and then he speaks about the shiur of bowing down. Why doesn't he put them together? Why doesn't he say how long is the shiur of lingering and bowing down, as long as it is to say this pasuk? Also says the Rebbe, why doesn't the Rambam bring the shiur, the amount, right when he brings the first halacha that you're not allowed to linger? Why does he bring it only when he's speaking about one bowing down on the way out, facing outwards? Now, in regards to the source of the Rambam, the Kesef Mishnah already cites both a Bavli and a Yerushalmi that bring this pasuk that the Rambam brings. And generally, the way the Rebbe divides the opinions in the Gemara, we generally seem to have three different opinions in the Gemara of how much of this pasuk needs to be read. Whether it's the whole pasuk, which actually starts earlier and speaks about how they saw the glory of Hashem, etc., or is it only the middle part of the pasuk, the part of bowing down, Vayichru apayim arza, or, as the Rambam puts it, the middle part, the bowing down, and V'hoides la Hashem ki tov ki li'olam chazvei, also the thanking of Hashem. So we have these three opinions, and the question is, why is the Rambam paskening according to this third way, that it's only the middle part of the pasuk and the end of the pasuk? The Rebbe says, generally when we look at the Rambam, when the Rambam is discussing the Isser, the prohibition of staying in the Beis HaMikdash for longer than one needs after he's Tameh, it seems to be that there's three separate kind of Isurim. In other words, there's one problem if he bows down, another problem if he lingers, and another problem if he goes out the longer way. It's not just describing three situations, but it's actually each one is a different geder, each one is a different type of Isur. So therefore, says the Rebbe, now becomes the question. When a person bowed down, but towards the outside, which is clearly not a normal way of bowing down, with his back to the Beis HaMikdash, not towards the Beis HaMikdash, and we say that he's going to be chayiv only if it took him a certain amount of time, so now we need to understand based on what is the schiyuv, as a result of which Isser is the schiyuv. Is it coming because of the bowing down per se, or is it coming because of the lingering? What would be the difference between these two ways? So the Rebbe first discusses a concept that we know, that chatzi shiur osur min ha'Torah. If you do something, but only half the measure of the Isser, although you won't be chayiv, it's still osur, it's still not allowed. Now, this idea of saying for a half a measure is still asur, that's only possible to say if the act was done in full, but it just wasn't done for a certain amount of time or a certain measure, a quantity of food, for example, that was supposed to be eaten, or a certain amount of thing that had to be done. So then you say it's only half the measure. But if the actual thing was not done completely, for example, a person only did a half a malacha on Shabbos, then that's not Chatzi Shir, that's not Osir Minatoida, that's not called done half the measure. And therefore applying it to our cases, and here will be the difference. If we say that a person that bowed down on his way out, it is considered bowing down, it's just a question of how long he bowed down for, so then we could say that a person that bowed down, even if he did it for less than the amount of time, then the act of bowing happened. It just wasn't. If he did it for a shorter amount of time, then it wasn't the amount of time, and therefore there will be the Isur of Chatzi Shir. If, on the other hand, it's all about a gather of lingering, so then lingering, you can't say that there's a half a lingering. If it wasn't a certain amount of time, that whole act of lingering didn't exist. And therefore, you wouldn't be able to apply this concept of Chatzi Shir. If it was less than that, there would be no Isur at all. So again, so far, we have two ways of looking at this idea of when this person is bowing down, and we're speaking about that he's bowing down at the way facing outward of the Beis HaMikdash, and it's taking him a certain amount of time. So we have two ways of looking at it. Is it because of the bowing or because of the lingering? Says the Rebbe, the Rambam actually holds a third way. It's not the bowing down per se, because bowing down doesn't exist unless it's towards the inside. It's also not the lingering, but rather it's a combination of both. When he lingers, when he does this bowing down for a certain amount of time, that creates that now it's considered ishtachava. Now it was considered bowing down, although it usually wouldn't be considered bowing down since it's facing the wrong way. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand why the Rambam concludes with the words, V'zeu shir ishtachavoya, this is the measure for how long one needs to bow down. If the Rambam would have just said right away, unless he delays the amount of time it takes to bowing down, we would have thought that even towards the outside, it's still considered bowing down, but it needs to have a certain length of time. And therefore the Rambam says, he's only chayiv if he delayed kashir according to the shir. And what's the shir of delaying? He brings the pasuk. And then he concludes again, v'zeu shir ishtachavoy, and he says this is the shir of bowing down, because he's trying to emphasize 2 points. On one hand, he's trying to emphasize that there's no such thing as bowing down. It's not called bowing down when it's towards the outside. But if he did delay a certain amount of time, then it becomes bowing down, and the chiyuv, the obligation, is coming because of the bowing down. And what is that shir? The shir is, in order to read this part of the pasuk that we quoted, Vayichru apayim arzo, till the end of the pasuk. And that's why the Rambam brings it in this halacha when he's speaking about the bowing down towards the outside, and not earlier when he was just speaking about the general idea that there's an isur of lingering. Because according to the Rambam, there's this idea of bowing down is not coming because of the lingering. It's rather, in other words, it's not, the problem is not that he bowed down, it's just not long, that it's bowing down by etzem. And in other words, the chiyuv is not because of how long it took him, but how long it took him is creating that now it's considered bowing down. And therefore, if the Rambam would have said it in the previous halacha when he's just speaking about the actual idea of lingering, we would have thought that that's just a gedder in lingering. We wouldn't understand that that's what's creating that the bowing down towards the outside should be considered bowing down. In order to explain this further, says the Rebbe, generally we know with shiurim of that halacha l'Moshe Misinai, usually there wouldn't be any machloikas. There's no machloikas in halacha l'Moshe Misinai. How do we have a machloikas in our case regarding the shir of ishtachavo? Says the Rebbe, we must say that the halacha l'Moshe Misinai is just in a general way that lingering is according to the amount of time that it takes to bow down. But we weren't told how long it takes to bow down. But it makes sense to say that somewhere in Torah there will be a remez for this shir. Now, all of the opinions will agree that it's hinted in the pasuk that's discussing the order of bowing down in the Beis HaMikdash. But the machloikas is which part of the pasuk. And the svaras of machloikas is going to depend on these 3 ways of how we explained what it means when a person is lingering, the amount of time it takes to bow down. To explain, in the process of bowing down, in the order of bowing down, there's 3 points. There's what brought you to bow down. For example, this idea of seeing godliness. There's the actual act of the bowing down. And then there is the taking one's time, lingering during bowing down, when he's thanking Hashem, praising Hashem, etc. And we see this in this pasuk that's brought. The Yidden saw the glory of Hashem, they saw the fire coming down, they bow down, and they thank Hashem. So the 3 opinions, or the 3 svaras in the Gemara of which part of the pasuk needs to be said, how much of the pasuk is considered the amount of bowing down, fits with the three ways that we explained of how we understand this geder of the shiur of bowing down. That is, if we understand that the measure of bowing down is because of the lingering, in other words, it's all about just the lingering, then it makes sense to say that the amount of time for bowing down is the whole order that it takes from the beginning to the end. From the seeing godliness, of being inspired, bowing down, and the result, which would correspond to saying the whole pasuk that describes these three stages. If it's not about the measure of lingering, but it's actually just a geder of bowing down itself, then it makes sense that we only need the actual act of bowing down and the part of the pasuk that describes the act of bowing down. According to the third way, which is the shita of the Rambam that combines these two things, that it's because of the shehiyah, because of the lingering, it's now considered hishtachava, it's considered bowing down. It makes sense then that we have two things. We have the bowing down itself, but not only that, also the time that it takes after the bowing down, when he focuses on the intent of the bowing down and the thanking and praising Hashem, and therefore it corresponds to the second and third parts of the pasuk. The Rebbe now moves on to explain this all Chassidus. We know that hishtachava generally represents the concept of bittul. And in this bittul, in this person, the feeling of one nullifying himself to Hashem, there are three levels. The very highest level is when the bittul, the ishtachava, the bowing down is coming because of re'iyas alikus, seeing godliness. Like in the time of the Beis HaMikdash when they saw godliness. Or an hour avoided that would be when a person is thinking about the greatness of Hashem and it's like he sees godliness and he comes to the greatest level of bittul. Now this darga is not shaykh to every single person. The other extreme would be when there's only the act of ishtachava, only the act of bowing down, which means he doesn't have the feelings, he doesn't have the seeing of godliness or the feelings, but he's forcing himself to do the right thing. So that's the lowest extreme. But more could be demanded of a yid. The middle or average or regular path for a regular yid that could be demanded of every yid, this fits with the shita of the Rambam, which is, on the one hand, yes, we're starting with the act of bowing down, but every single person could achieve and can impact that not only he stays by the act of bowing down, but it also impacts his feelings, his midos. And therefore, the Rambam's opinion is that we're dealing both with the act of bowing down, in other words, that part of the pasuk that speaks about the bowing down itself, but also the result for thanking and the praising of Hashem, which all fits very much with the famous Rambam that says every single yid deep down inside wants to do the right things. So even when he's forced, so to speak, to do the right thing, it's really only being megala. What deep down inside is every single yid anyways wants to be deeply, deeply connected to the Eibishter all of the time.